Okay. What do you mean?
Not letting your personality get in the way of partnerships.
Okay, are you saying there's egos out there? I'm telling you, it only gets worse the higher you go. Okay. So, you're set up pretty well. You got the hard stuff. And we didn't even talk about discipline and the ability to solve complex problems. So you're set up pretty well. So don't sell yourselves short. You have what it takes to make a difference in our group of work. Okay? Next one. Go ahead.
Adaptive thinking.
Oh, I'd say I was already moving on to the next one.
Very adaptive.
Yeah. No, but you know how to think competitively, right? Because you're always thinking about an enemy, right? You're always thinking about your competition. I'm amazed also at how little I see businesses thinking about their competition. They spend so much time and energy on the internal stuff that they don't have time. They don't have any energy left to figure out what's going on outside. And guess what happens? They get surprised. Okay. Next one. Be clear about what you want to accomplish. As I said, the number one question I asked as Army Chief, same question I asked as Commander in Iraq. No kidding, what are we really trying to accomplish? And what I found was, the higher I got, the more complex the issues became, and the harder it was for me to get my head around it, and let alone articulate a clear way ahead. Yet the higher I got, the more important it was that what came out of my headquarters was at least somewhat clear. Because when it left the 4-star headquarters and began trickling its way down through the many layers of the chain of command, if it wasn't clear at the top, the poor people on you all, you didn't have a chance. And you all think people at higher headquarters are crazy anyway, but it's so important that you have to continue to work on that and work on that until you get clarity. Now, how do you do that? I mean, it's really hard. I'll probably say this a couple of times. If it was easy, everybody would do it. But it's hard. And the Army has a way of looking at helping leaders find solutions to complex issues. And it's understand, visualize, describe, direct. And I did it intuitively in Iraq. And actually, I was back maybe a month, and I was up at the Army War College getting briefed on what was going on in the doctrine arena. And they laid this out for me. And I said, that's exactly what I did in Iraq. And that's exactly what I continue to do as Chief of Staff of the Army. Understand. You have to build a depth of understanding in your subject matter. You have to know your subject matter better than anybody else in the organization. Because you have to not only understand it, you have to be able to take that understanding and visualize where you want to take the organization and how you're going to get them there. And it's not a one-person show. Because what I found was I'd go out, I'd gather information, and I do reading, I get stuff in my head, and then I describe it to people inside and outside the organization. And they would help me sharpen my thinking. And it was a kind of a back and forth. So I'm talking to folks, saying, this is how I see things, this is what I think we need to do. And they'd say, well, what about this? Have you thought about that? And I'm getting sharper and sharper. Until I get to the point where I can direct, which I found I had to write it down. And I found that writing something out forced me to have a much greater level of clarity in my mind than having a PowerPoint presentation or giving a speech. So understand, visualize, describe, direct. Now, let me give you an example how I applied that is when I came into the Army. So I had about 60 days from the time I left Iraq to the time I took over as Army Chief. And so I put together a team of folks to help me figure out where the Army was and where it needed to go. And of course, they filled a rental van full of briefing books and backed it up to my house. And I talked to people outside the Army. And at the end of that 60-day period, I thought my vision for the Army, what I wanted it to accomplish, was going to be something like America's Army. An agile, disciplined warrior team, dominant across the spectrum of 21st century combat. Hurrah! But it didn't quite sit with me. And I realized that while I had built a pretty good understanding, I needed to get out and see what was really going on. And so my wife and I embarked on about a 4-month trip around the Army. We talked to people all across the Army at every level. Soldiers, sergeants, lieutenants, senior officers, families, civilians, everybody. And when I came back, I talked to the folks and my subordinate leaders in the Pentagon. I said, this is how I'm seeing this. Well, we worked at that and worked at that for 4 months. And at the end of that 4-month period, I realized that what I'd seen was an Army that was very capable, yet stretched by, at that time, 6 years of war. And so what I realized was that we were out of balance. That we were so weighed down by the current demands that we couldn't do the things that we knew we needed to do to take care of soldiers and families and prepare the Army for the future. So I began saying, we need to put the Army back in balance. And I said that every place I went, inside and outside the Army, for 4 years. And I drove that home. And at the end of 4 years, we were in a fundamentally different and better place. Now, obviously, there was a lot of structure underneath all that. But because it was a clear, simple statement, I could ingrain it in the organization, and it moved us forward. It was the what we were trying to accomplish. Now, let me take it out of the Department of Defense and put it into in the business world. There's a wonderful book by Jim Collins called Great by Choice, and it's worth picking it up. But Jim, he looked at 20,400 companies from all different industries. And what he was trying to figure out was, why did some companies thrive in this goofy environment that they're all operating in, and while others muddled through or failed? You know how many companies he found outperformed their industry by 10 times out of that 20,400? So this is outperforming their industry by 10 times over about a 10-year period. Consistent, sustained, positive performance.
0.
1, close. 5, closer.
Or 0.
7. 7 out of 20,400. So like I said, if it was easy, everybody would do it. But it's not easy. And guess what? He found that those 7, the reason they succeeded where others didn't, was the distinctive behavior of the leader. And one of the first things he found, he called it empirical creativity. But what he found was the leader knew their industry and their organization better than anybody else. That they didn't, when they were looking for information, they didn't just go and Google it or talk to an alleged expert or ask a friend. They dove deeply into and did their own research. They relied on empirical data for their decisions. And they worked hard at getting it. So as you're working on figuring out what it is you're trying to accomplish, if you're going to be different, if you're going to be one of the 7 instead of one of the 20,393, it begins with that very deep understanding of your operating plan. So, effective action begins with a clear statement of what you're trying to accomplish. Because without a clear statement of what you're trying to accomplish, there's not a common purpose. And without a common purpose, there's not effective execution. And in business, just like in war, That's faith. Third point, take the long view. There's an article in USA Today, it's probably 2 years ago now, about an interview with Steve Case, one of the founders of AOL. He runs Revolution Growth, investment firm in Washington, D.C., looking for kind of mid-level companies to invest in. They asked him the question, what is it you look for in an entrepreneur that you're going to invest in? He said 3 things. One is the idea. They look for big ideas that solve big problems. Second, no surprise, they look for passionate leaders who've done their homework, who've dug deep into their environment. And lastly, they look for leaders that take a long view. And one of the things he said, and I think you'll find this true, everything takes more time and money than you think it does. You can probably, I try not to say always or never, but that's pretty close to always. And you have to look at where you want this to go. And he said we look for companies that are building to last rather than building to flip. And I can't tell you how many startups I've talked to that think they're going to get bought by Google in 6 months. It ain't going to happen. If it is, you're really lucky. And that's good. But it takes a long time for these things to unfold. I had, is there an eraser over here? Yeah, there is. Look at this little happy face right here. What I found is that the leader, that's all right. I always had to be looking 2 or 3 steps ahead of everybody else in the Army. Okay? Because everybody else is so focused on execution that they're not looking to the future. But my responsibility as the chief was to make sure the Army was prepared for success in the future. Isn't that great? So I get there, and after I'm there about a year, I start looking at the budget. You get a gold star. Thank you. You did great.
All the captains, sir, I'm up here taking care of you.
Look at this. I haven't had a captain take care of me, and I can't remember how. Okay, so I'm there about a year, and I start getting this uneasy feeling. And this is another one of Jim Collins' attributes of successful leaders. Productive paranoia. That you're always, as soon as you get the plan out, you're always uncomfortable and you're looking for what's going to happen next that's going to unhinge you. But you're doing it in a productive way. You're not bugging everybody all the time. You're doing it in your own head, so you're prepared. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the budget. And I'm saying, our budget right now is $250 million. This is 2008. I said, I just don't see that continuing. And I had my guys go back and I say, look at the defense budget since since World War II. Well, comes down for World War II, goes up for Korea. Comes down from Korea, goes up for Vietnam. Comes down from Vietnam, goes up for the Reagan building. Comes down for that, comes up for 7/11. We were there. There was only one way that the Army budget was going. And so I had to start preparing Army leaders for that eventuality. And when things are good, it's hard to get people to prepare for a different future. And I wound up sending a bunch of these generals to business school to try to get their heads around what was coming in our direction. My big concern was that we were going to have to start reducing the force before we got back to at least 2 years between deployments. Because in 2008, we were sending troops over for a year and back for a year, and then right back. And so what I didn't want to do was to have to reduce the size of the force before we had 2 years at home, because I thought people would just say, the heck with this. And so what we did is we started working on that, and it took all 4 years, over the other 3 years I was there, to get people to buy into that. And when the first cuts came for about $10 billion, we were able to take them without reducing our industry. But not only was I the only one that saw this, I had a lot of opposition to it because we were getting the job done. But I had to prepare the Army for a different future to be successful. That's the leader's job. It's not just meeting today's requirements, it's preparing the organization for success in the future. So you're the future's person. You want to take the organization to where the puck is going, not where the puck is. All right? So no pucking around here. Just so you can pay attention. Fourth one, look outside. Back to Steve Case. Steve, in that interview, also said the biggest mistake that startups make is underestimating the competition. And as I said, I'm amazed at how little people focus on their competition in the businesses that I've been involved in. As I look out there, I think about leaders understanding what I call their operating environment. All right? And we've already talked about internal. But whatever you're thinking about your operating environment, I think you need to talk about external, competition, and your sphere of influence. I'm just going to talk about these three here. But they're the things outside of your organization. External. What are the things that are happening outside of your organization that can impact you? Competition and sphere of influence are also part of that external environment. But Rick, what are some examples of things outside of your own business that might cause you problems?
Economy.
Pardon?
Economy.
The general economy. Sure.
Regulation.
Regulations. The pesky government stepping involved. What else?
Disruptive tech.
New technologies. Okay?
Bad advice.
Bad advice. Okay, but so clearly there are things that you have to keep your eye on. And you remember Marty Feldman in Young Frankenstein?
Yeah.
He's got one eye that goes this way and one eye that goes that way. I mean, you almost have to be like Marty Feldman. You got to have one eye inside what's going on, and you got to have one eye outside going on. Competition. I break that out separately. What can a competition do to you?
Make you better.
Huh?
They can make you better if you use it.
They can make you better if you use them right. In fact, in all of this, when you're looking outside, in all of this, you're looking for opportunities as well as challenges. You've all been in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, or a lot of you have. You know, if they get you on your back foot, you're at a disadvantage. So you have to have an offensive mindset. You've got to be out there looking across this environment, not just for challenges, but also for opportunities if you're going to keep the organization moving forward. Go ahead.
So they can change your pricing strategy. They can drive prices down.
Sure.
Economics.
Okay. And then let me move over here to sphere of influence. You familiar with that one? You familiar with that term?
Maybe you surround yourself with.
This is a term that I kind of started thinking about when I was a brigadier in Bosnia. And what I realized was whenever I had a crisis, I had to get a hold of a bunch of people to help me calm the crisis down. And it was usually a Bosnian, a Serb, a Croat, and other Americans or multinational forces that were in the area. And so I started thinking about a sphere of influence. And what I did from then on was every time I went into a job, I said to myself, okay, after I've been in the job for about a month or so, I'd say, okay, who is it outside of my organization that I need to influence if my organization is going to be successful. Okay? For example, as the Chief of Staff of the Army, who was my sphere of influence? Well, I had my boss, the Secretary of the Army. I had the Secretary of Defense, his boss. I had the other services. And I had the chairman and the vice chairman and the joint chiefs. Oh, and then I had my 535 directors in Congress. And what I'll tell you is that the higher up I went, the more the keys to my success lay outside my organization rather than inside. And I had to spend proportionally more time outside the Army doing things than I did inside. And I'll leave it at that. I would tell you I probably spent 60% of my time outside the Army and only about 40% inside. And it was about the same in Iraq. So once you get things going, you need to get that one eye looking to the outside. Just think Marty Feldman. Remember Marty Feldman if you're thinking too much inside the organization. And when I go out and do this to businesses, it's amazing to me how much time the leaders are spending inside. You know what ties them up more than anything else? People. People issues. Okay. The other thing that you get from looking outside is big ideas. And it won't surprise any of you that we didn't get many big ideas bubbling up from inside the Pentagon. They came from outside. Fred Smith, United States Marine Corps, gave me a little paper when I was visiting him in his office one day that he wrote and basically said everything I needed to run FedEx I learned in the Marine Corps. So Fred started FedEx in 1971 in Little Rock, Arkansas. He had a plane and an idea. 2 years later, he moved it to Memphis. He had 14 planes, and he was starting up his business. Now it's one of the biggest businesses in the world. Where did the idea come from? I mean, this is an integrated air-ground distribution system. Where did the idea come from? Huh?
Maybe logistics.
It came from him studying the banking industry. That's how bank clearinghouses work, up and spoke. And he wrote a paper on it when he was going to Yale back in the 60s. But the idea came from something completely outside. There's a McKinsey paper that I read probably 2 years ago now that said that the technologies, the high-speed technologies that everybody thinks are going to change the world, they may, but they're not going to generate positive economic activity for another 20 years or so. And he said what's going to generate economic activity in the next 20 years are combining already existing technologies in ways that other people haven't imagined. And I think Uber is a great example. Taxi's been around for 100 years. Cell phone's been around since the 80s. GPS, commercial GPS, been around since the 90s. Put all those together and you have something. Okay? But you have to be looking outside. You got to know not just your company, but your industry better than anybody else. And I can't tell you how many times when I'm going around talking to startup folks, they say, no one else has thought of this. I'm the only one.
Genius.
Well, my antenna go up because I say, you know, it's probably not that true, and if it's as great idea as you say it is, somebody will take it up here pretty quickly. All right? So you're always looking outside and into the future. Number 5. Align your resources and your ideas, and you got to keep coming back to this. One of the things I saw in Iraq, I called it the if-onlys. I go around and visit units, and they'd say, if only the governor would do this. If only the Iraqi army would do this. If only the Iraqi police would do that. If only the government in Baghdad would do this. And I'd say, hey, it ain't going to happen. You have to look at things as how they are, not how you want them to be. And that's hard. I mean, one of the first boards I was on was a startup. And I had to take the CEO aside because he would talk about things to prospective investors like he wanted them to be, not like they were. And we were teetering on an integrity issue. So you have to be very, very careful with that. I told him, I said, you have to ask the hard questions yourself. If you're going to set realistic goals and objectives, that match your resources. Back to this company. So I went with him up to pitch a venture capital firm in Boston. They gave him $800,000 to start. And they gave him an advisor from the company to help him. Well, about 6 months into it, I got a call from the advisor who said, hey, this isn't going well. The CEO seems to think that running a startup is about wearing t-shirts to work, not shaving, and traveling around to conferences. And so we started talking to him, and what happened was there was no reality, there was no structure, and at the end of 8 months, there was no product that the $800,000 was provided for. He didn't match his ideas with his resources. Now, to his credit, he learned from that and bounced back, and now the company is actually bringing in revenues and moving on the way to profitability. So he was resilient enough to bounce back from that, but it was kind of a dumbass play to start off. Okay. Anyway, you got to ask the hard questions yourself, and it helps to have a mentor or someone that you trust that has a different perspective than you do, that can look at what you're doing from outside and say, here's how this looks. You need a different view. And you got to keep matching those resources with your ideas. And then lastly, you got to be bold. As you look at this VUCA world, none of us can predict the future. But Yogi Berra used to say predictions are hard, especially when you're talking about the future. God rest his soul. Anytime you make a decision, you're making a decision about the future. And we don't know what that outcome is going to be. But in this environment, to succeed, you have to act. And what I found in this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, people become flummoxed by the complexity. And they don't act. But you have to act to succeed. When I walked into my office for the first time as Army Chief of Staff, there was the desk was completely empty and clean for the only time in the 4 years I was there. Not a scrap of paper on it. And it was a beautiful hand-carved wooden desk. It was hand-carved in 1903. It had come over from the War Department then. But right under the glass, in the place where I sat, was a 5x8 card. And the title of the card was Boldness. And on it was a quote, it's my favorite quote, from Theodore Roosevelt. And it goes like this: it's not the critic that counts. It's not the one who points out how the strong one stumbled or the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the one who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs well and comes up short again and again. And if at best in the end they know the value of high achievements and great devotions, and if at worst, if they fail, they at least fail while daring greatly, so that their soul will never be counted among those cold and timid ones that know neither victory nor defeat. Dare great things and be bold, and you will change the direction of this country, because you are the future leaders of the United States of America. So thanks very much, and I'm happy to take questions about whatever you would like to talk about. When I go out, and sometimes I'm on stage with a politician, and go. And the generals mean no, really, stop. Anyway, so, what do you think?
I have a question.
Yeah.
As I was walking in this morning, I was trying to think to myself, my experience in the Army was, I went through boot camp, I went through, oh sure. So my experience in the Army, I went through boot camp, and then I went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and spent 14 months there in electronics school. And from there I went to Augsburg, Germany. It's a beautiful small town. I worked in an air-conditioned building. We did 24-hour maintenance on electronic surveillance equipment. Went skiing on the weekends. Never saw combat. I shot my rifle when we had to for target practice. But something I've noticed, every place I've worked, when as you're working somewhere, you meet people, and you find that you respect certain people a certain way. You can see the way they carry themselves, and then months later, you might find out that that person is from the military. And I've seen that fairly consistently everywhere I've worked. But as I was walking here this morning, I was recalling what people here have talked about their military experience was. And I was trying to figure out what is the common denominator between my military experience, everyone else here, your different military experiences. What do you believe ties, or what part of the military experience do you believe causes that personality to come out in somebody?
I think what somebody said over here earlier, it's culture.
Just being part of the
It's a
culture.
values-based culture. That when we raise our hand, we raise our hands to support something larger than ourselves, the Constitution of the United States of America. And there's something, a common bond that comes from that. And then, I'm sure it's this way in the other services, but as soon as a soldier comes into basic training, they start with the 7 Army values: loyalty, duty, respect, self-service, honor, integrity, personal courage. They're drummed into you every day, and that changes people. So I believe it's the common culture and the common values.
Just being a part of the system.
Together. And it doesn't make any difference whether you went to combat or not. You still volunteered. You still came in, and you still did your job. Anybody else? Go ahead right there and then here.
Sir Paul Ernst, thank you. This is amazing having you here. My question is, with influencing or leading outside of your organization, can you speak to what you've seen and the skills military brings to translating across cultures, or whether it be within a company, translating across different industries, regulators, what you've seen and how the military experience brings values?
Okay. Well, let me ask you this, because there's some things that the military experience might not do so well with. How well do you think the military prepares you to network?
No.
Right? But that's what you need, and that's kind of what influence is about. You've got to build the network, the external network, before you need it. Now so when I was a lieutenant colonel, I decided it would be interesting to work in the office of legislative liaison. Now that was a place where colonels went to die. But I decided it would be interesting. So I went there and I worked there. And what I found and what I learned was how to talk to civilians. Because they were someone that were outside of the Army, who we needed influence. And I take these generals up there and they'd give them these PowerPoint slides that I didn't even understand. And they tried to explain it to a civilian. And I realized that we needed to tailor our presentations to the audience that we're talking to. But, I mean, the Army is such a closed society that, we weren't training people to operate outside. So that was one of the big things that I learned as a lieutenant colonel, and I just kept going with. But you need to understand the context that the person you're trying to influence is operating in, and then shape your presentation to deal with that. And you got to build the network before you need it. I think you know that, right? Right here.
So, I was asked this last night.
So how do you feel about government contracting? And also, the two-part question, being out of the military now, how do you deal with just everyday people compared to dealing with military veterans?
What'd you say?
So I was just like,
Okay,
but I'm still, you know, a government contractor. So this whole world is new to me. So I'm trying to figure out.
yeah, okay,
It's like, oh no,
okay. So, don't take this the wrong way. Well, look, I worked for the government for 41 years. It is the most inefficient bureaucracy that I can even imagine. Actually, I'm told the VA is actually worse than the Department of Defense. So, if you've got a startup here, if you think you're going to sell it to the government and make a lot of money, I'd make sure you had alternatives. Because there are huge organizations out there, and that's all they do. And they have probably a staff this big working just the Army stuff. So I kind of tell folks that maybe go to the government a little bit later, because it'll consume you. And once you get it all set up and you get your network built, your influence, and they'll all transfer. And you'd have to start all over. Oh, it's so frustrating. Okay, what was the second part?
how do you deal with?
Oh yeah, how do you deal with people outside the military? So, I got a great piece of advice from my grandfather when I was about 12. And he said, you're no better than anyone, but nobody's better than you, so treat everybody with respect, but don't take any guff from anyone. And that's how I treat people inside and outside. That's how I treat people all my life. And it worked well for me. I treat people with respect until they demonstrate to me that they don't deserve it. And it works inside the Army and it works outside the Army. Outside my antenna just really sharp. Okay.
Time for one more.
One more? There you go.
All right, so, back in the day, we used to have a lot of military leaders used to get out, generals and all that, used to get out, join politics, lead our country and all that stuff. Now we got a bunch of yahoos running the country, right? And so what do you think, why aren't people like yourself getting out more and getting into high offices? I think Old Power, the last person we had, was like that. So it seems like all the generals and stuff.
All the powers never held elective office.
No, but I'm saying the highest leadership position in the country. So what I'm saying is, like, what I see is I see a bunch of generals and all that getting out, and they go to contractors and people that they can use their influence to get back into government contracting. And seem like, why is that?
They're going to get paid.
No, I'll tell you what. Generals make lousy politicians. It's not what we do. It's not about us, it's about the collective group. And I watched Wes Clark, who I've known since I was a captain. And our kids went to school together, and I know him very well. He was the most politically astute military officer that I ever knew. He went out and thought he was going to come from being the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe and go back to Arkansas and run for Senate. That they were just going to accept him just like that. Where the reality was that Dale Bunkers had been grooming his son to do that for years. And he just got eaten up by politics. We need to, we understand politics and the impact it can have on the military, but we can't get, we're just no good at it. So I think that's why you see people shying away from that. Now, you all can have a huge impact. Patrick Murphy is the assistant secretary, or the undersecretary of the Army now. He ran for Congress in Pennsylvania. He's an Iraq vet. Ran for Congress in Pennsylvania, and he's going forward. We need some young blood in there. We're not, We got this old gray hair here. We're pretty well done. We're giving back a little bit here and there, but we're basically, we're done. You aren't. You can make a difference. And I encourage you to get involved. Okay, listen, wonderful to spend some time with you. Good luck for what you're doing. Normally I get some emails and things, people who want to talk or need some help on something. I'm happy to do that. So let me know if I can assist you. Thanks very much.